Hi, I'm Lucas Gilkey with Hometown Hero, and today we're here with Jody McGinness from the HIA, the Hemp Industries Association. We're going to be talking about a variety of different things and how this wonderful organization helps the hemp industry and the cannabis industry as a whole. So thank you for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. So Jody, if you could, let's start with the history of the Hemp Industries Association and Jack Herer and sort of how this organization came to be, because I know it's one of the oldest cannabis industries in the country, and that you guys have done a multitude of amazing things over the years for cannabis, and everybody watching may not fully understand who you guys are, what you guys have done, or where you came from. So I guess give us a little bit of a history lesson on sort of the HIA and how we got to be kind of where we are.
Okay, thanks. HIA was founded back in '94, but before that, going all the way back to the '80s, as you mentioned, there was a guy named Jack Herer who was the nation's leading hemp activist. He was beating the drum for the fact that there were varieties of the cannabis plant that could be grown without high levels of THC. They could be made into paper and made into textiles, made into all these finished products. And in fact, that humanity had been doing so going back thousands and thousands of years. So he was championing the cause of hemp before anybody else was.
Yeah, he wrote one of my favorite books, Emperor Wears No Clothes.
That's right. The Emperor Wears No Clothes was an incredibly influential book, and there's a great story about it, actually, if I can share with you.
Please.
Back, I think it was 1979, Jack Herer and his cohorts are in Sacramento in California protesting or picketing for legalization. And young Republican, or not a young, an old Republican candidate for president is coming in and the entrance to the building and sees the protesters and the smoke and all that stuff, and he asks the guy, who are those people out front with the signs, and the guy says, oh, that's marijuana protesters, they're trying for legalization, but they have permits and there's nothing we can do about it. And the candidate for president says, I'll see if I can do something about that. That candidate was Ronald Reagan. Now, normally, if you got ticketed,
War on drugs.
Yes.
Just say no.
Yeah,
Dare,
exactly.
all that.
Exactly. And normally, if you got ticketed for what they were doing in front of that state house, you'd get like a $5 fine, and it was not a big deal. Jack Herer went to jail because of it, and it was while he was in jail that he sat down and wrote that book, which was so influential. So Reagan's attempt to silence him really gave him an opportunity to sit down, focus his thoughts, and put out something that's, I think it's in like its 13th printing. It's sold over 1 million copies, and God knows how many have been stolen. So it's done really well. Just about everybody who was a part of the HIA and its founding in '94 took their inspiration from Jack in that book. Through the '80s and '90s, there was a legalization movement already started. NORML got started, and they didn't like Jack. They didn't like hemp.
Interesting.
They thought he's just talking about wild-eyed stuff, and we need to focus on the victims and the crime and legalization as a moral issue. Yeah. And he was saying, no, we don't need to start there. We need to start with the industrial properties of this plant. The fact that we could be raising it and growing it as a cash crop.
Which is interesting, because that's where he starts with Emperor Wears No Clothes, is really around the industrial side and all the usages from using it in the sails and the ropes from all the different boats for hundreds and thousands of years.
Yeah, there's evidence from 12,000 BC of cannabis usage among Paleolithic people. So it's pretty remarkable that we've lived that long with this plant. And that was really the message that he brought, which was that the war on drugs, the banning of what the government dubbed marijuana, was an unnatural thing. It was an aberration in human history. Prior to 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act, humanity had lived basically side by side with this plant, going back before written histories. The industrial side was the thing that excited him, because as he learned about the plant and all the things that had been or could be done with it, he recognized that there was a strong profit motive for legalization. There are industries that this could be a feedstock for that could get behind the idea of legalization, not because they're interested in the high THC varieties, but because they're interested in the fiber for making textiles, or the woody core center for making paper or something like that. So it was really ingenious, and in spite of all that opposition, he started a group. It was called Hemp. That was the acronym. Hemp stood for Help End Marijuana Prohibition. That was Jack Herer's book, or Jack Herer's group. And along in his wake came what I would consider sort of the first generation of hemp activists. There were guys like David Bronner from Dr. Bronner's and Chris Conrad, who was sort of on the professorial side, and some researchers, and they started adding some legitimacy or fleshing out the arguments that were sketched out in the book. And part of their strategy was to found a trade association because they saw hemp as a foot in the door, right? Hemp was the first logical way that we could legalize.
The first step.
Yeah, and but it was a plan. They founded the HIA back in '94 with a plan of getting hemp legalized, and then they wanted to move on to medical marijuana, and then eventually adult use cannabis. And they thought at the time that it would take 5 years to get hemp legalized. Instead, it took 25. But that's where we were as of 2018.
Yeah, so essentially, and people may not realize this, but I've always, said that, Jack Herer was sort of the guy that had the foresight and the vision to understand what was coming. He's no longer alive, but what's happening right now with the hemp industry and hemp-derived cannabinoids is essentially what he believed would happen coming to fruition, if I'm not mistaken, correct? It just took longer than he had planned.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Hemp-derived cannabinoids represent a small fraction of the plant being legalized. And everything that's come from that just in the last 5 years, we have new businesses that have been founded. Obviously, CBD has been huge. And then in the last couple of years, the emergence of hemp-derived cannabinoids have exploded into, some estimate a $30 billion or more industry. And if you think about it, it's really a testament to American innovation, because they had 0.3% of this plant legal, and they weren't allowed to use Delta 9 THC, which is the compound in marijuana that gets you high. And nobody had really done any investigation of this plant because it was illegal. Doing research into the cannabis plant, nobody knew much about it. There was just sort of learned wisdom that growers shared with each other. There was relatively few academic studies. And what they've discovered is there's a universe of now over 130 major and minor cannabinoids, all of them with different impacts and potential health uses or wellness uses. And that's just in the first couple of years we've seen this explosion of new finished products on the market. And it really is, like you said, sort of the vision that Jack Herer had was to take the reins or get out of the way and let hemp do its thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I kind of perceive that to be what's happening in the industry right now with hemp, is that a lot of the hemp companies are leading the innovation and leading the drive forward for cannabis as a whole, simply because we have the ability to do so. A lot of the marijuana companies still have their hands tied. They can't do a lot of things. But on the hemp side, it's really being allowed to progress in sort of a very fast-paced way.
Yeah. The scheduled status of marijuana still being federally illegal really puts a damper on business in a lot of ways, yeah, and handicaps them in a lot of ways, having to deal with cash-only businesses, just the realities of dealing with a federally illegal product means that they can't go state to state, right? They have closed markets where they have to basically stay. They can't cross state lines because that becomes a federal issue, yeah, with their products. So it's very different than hemp. Hemp is not burdened by those outrageous regulations that have to do with the illegality of marijuana. They don't have the high tax, hemp businesses don't have the high tax burdens that the marijuana industry does. And that makes sense. I mean, if some states and those businesses got out ahead of the federal government, they decided they were going to go into business with an illegal product, and that is going to come with a lot of burdens and a lot of roadblocks. Hemp operators don't have those because they waited until the federal government gave the green light. Yeah. And that's why instead of large multi-state operators and monopolies like you see in marijuana, you see an explosion of small businesses and mom and pop shops opening up, and it really there's not a huge barrier to participation in the hemp industry with extreme licensing fees and things like that.
Yeah, so in Texas it's $250 for a license.
Right. So I mean, you can get into the hemp business, and most people, by and large, are barred from getting into the marijuana business.
Yeah.
Just by virtue of the
what's
cost.
A license in Florida? $60,000, and you aren't even guaranteed to get a license. Mm-hmm. They just put you on a waiting list.
Yeah.
Jody, if you could, let me know about some of the federal efforts that you guys have undertaken. I know you guys have done a lot for our industry. Not everybody may fully understand the extent of what you guys have done, and I'd love to give you kind of an opportunity to talk about that a little bit because it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, thank you. Since our founding, HIA has been a thorn in the side of the DEA and an agitator in Washington for hemp justice, and on a lot of different fronts. I mean, we did symbolic protests, like one of our board members once buried a hemp seed on the DEA lawn and got arrested for tending hemp plants in a cage in the street, and they did a march on Washington and banners and stuff. But really what we've done effectively is we have advocated for the industry by fighting the DEA in court. There have been 4 federal lawsuits in our 29-year history.
Walk me through those if you could.
Sure. Way back in 2001, and here I'm talking about hemp oil, not CBD. I'm talking about the food or natural products that is excreted from the seed of the hemp plant. There was a natural products industry. You couldn't grow hemp in the U.S., but people imported the seeds. They made stuff from the seeds and foods and makeup and stuff like that. And the DEA decided, without any following its own rulemaking process, to simply put hemp oil on the federal schedule without asking for public comment or going through any of the process they had to. They decided hemp oil, which again has no psychoactive properties whatsoever, and is has been a staple of human diets for thousands of years. They put hemp oil on the federal schedule and so we took them to court. We challenged them in court. Everybody said we were crazy for taking on the Goliath to our David.
Yeah, they very rarely lose in court, is my understanding.
Yeah.
Very rarely.
And it took almost 3 years. We ended up, the HIA pulled out all the stops. We dissolved, the members voted to dissolve the organization and reincorporate in California to get the right circuit court judge for this case. So we relocated, dissolved the HIA, the members reconstituted, started up in California. And essentially, we won a victory that allowed hemp oil to be used in the United States and really laid the groundwork for hemp as a natural foods and natural products. So it was seminal, one, because we demonstrated that you could beat the DEA.
Yeah.
Which
is uncommon.
Right. I mean, the DEA is largely a bully, right? I mean, they throw their weight around, and people sort of saw them as the dragon that nobody could slay. And winning that court case pretty decisively opened the door to an entire segment for the hemp industry. Years later, they tried to do the same thing with CBD. The HIA was a plaintiff along with a couple other businesses, took them to court for that. We didn't actually win, but we came to a negotiated settlement, which, as you know, CBD is not scheduled, so that worked out for us. And we've had 2 lawsuits that we didn't win. Most recently, the DEA tried to put out a rule that said that hemp was a Schedule 1 narcotic during the extraction process if it tips over that Delta 9 cap. And obviously, since Congress legalized hemp and all of its derivatives, extracts, isomers, etc., they anticipated extracts in the extraction process when they legalized hemp. So we didn't win that, but we did get some assurances from the DEA that they don't plan on enforcing their rule. And we got assurances from the court that should the DEA try to enforce it, we will be able to petition with standing. So the reason we didn't get it is because they said nothing's being done to you right now.
It wasn't enforced, therefore you can't sue.
Right.
Yeah.
So we got to wait and let the DEA make the most. Now, that's a bit shifty, because what most people know is the DEA doesn't do its own enforcement. The DEA says stuff, and then local sheriff Bob decides he's going to follow the DEA's lead and comes to your store.
Yeah,
and
that
takes
was the
your
recent
stuff,
concern around THCO. It wasn't the DEA actually enforcing it, was local law enforcement using the word of the DEA to go try and do it.
And that's how they operate, and it's sort of an open secret that the DEA, you try explaining it to a judge, but the DEA doesn't actually have to act. People act on their behalf.
Correct.
And follow their lead.
Correct. So Jody, 2023 is a Farm Bill rewrite year, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. And so every 5 years, the Farm Bill is essentially rewritten or attempted to be rewritten. Can you talk to me about sort of what's going on with that, where we're at with that, how you guys are handling, and I guess walk me through some of the details on that.
Yeah, it's really important for the industry. The federal, what is called the Farm Bill, the last one was in 2018. It was a huge, like $800 billion funding bill that did all of these things. It does quite a lot of things that have to do with agriculture and nutrition. But one of the most important things to our industry that it did in 2018 is it changed the definition of hemp to make it federally legal. Yeah. So every 5 years they do a farm bill to channel the funding for that money. And there are various efforts afoot by lawmakers on both parties to advance bills that they want to get wrapped up into that farm bill. So to do things. Some of them want to make changes to the definition of hemp to, fix what they see as perceived problems. Some want to, change get rid of the 10-year felony ban on having a license as a hemp operator. So there's a lot of different bills that have been put forward, but they're in a sense being auditioned to be rolled up into that big omnibus bill. Most of the single bills won't even get a vote themselves. So right now what the HIA is doing is we're working with our national partners to come up and to put forth the hemp industry's consensus priorities. So as an industry that is a really big umbrella, aside from flower and cannabinoids, there's the fiber and herd industries, and there's the grain and the seed industries, and all of them have sort of differing priorities. We're still one agricultural commodity. So what you're seeing right now in other industries, the organic industry, cotton, all of the national trade groups have gotten together and said, this is what cotton needs, or this is what the organic industry needs.
Cotton,
so we're working on that for hemp. And I don't have to tell you, the hemp industry is a bit fractious. It's got a lot of personalities in it. It's the saying, it's like herding cats, doesn't really cut it. It's more like herding buffalo, but getting those priorities articulated in one voice for the industry is very important to being successful, because if you have different interests going in to meet with legislators, telling lawmakers different things, you end up with bad policy, and bad policy is bad for business. So we're working on a few different priorities with this farm bill. We want to avoid any changes to the definition of hemp that would put anything back on the federal schedule. Keep hemp opportunities growing, make more things from hemp. We would like to get rid of that 10-year felony ban. There are some things like creating a pilot program for certified seeds. We're such a young industry that you can't grow a hemp crop for seed or for fiber and have a lot of confidence in your yield yet. And as a farmer, knowing exactly how much your yield is going to be is the key to being successful. So we need to get to a place where a farmer can buy a certified seed, know exactly what they're going to get from it. So they're starting a pilot program.
That's something about having to destroy their crop.
Exactly, because it's such a risk to grow cannabis, even for hemp, because if you tip over that THC limit, there's not much you can do to get your investment back. Most states don't even allow you to remediate in any profound way, or even grind it up into the soil, which is a great thing to do for hemp, because it's got a great nutritional profile and it helps the soil, but it's not even allowed in a lot of states. It's just take a torch to it. So
that's amazing that you guys are doing all that. So I wanted to touch too. You guys were addressing on behalf of the industry the Pingree bill.
Shelley Pingree, yeah. The Hemp Advancement Act was introduced in the last Congress, and the HIA, the organization I represent, voted to support it. And in its initial offering, it was about an 80% good bill, but it had a couple of things in it that we weren't very happy with.
Yeah, I know. I have some friends in the industry that weren't thrilled about it, and weren't thrilled about you guys even supporting it.
That's true. The HIA has been around for a long time, so we're a little bit, I guess I should say, we play a little bit of a long game. We're not reactionary if we can avoid it. So
you guys are the oldest cannabis group in existence?
No, we're predated by a couple legalization groups, but definitely the oldest hemp group by 20 years. 15 years if you count vote hemp. So where was I? I'm sorry, what did you ask about? The Pingree bill, right, the Hemp Advancement Act. So we liked 80% of the bill, and we know that the way to change a bill is to sit down at the table with the authors and work on it. So as a supporter of the bill, as a member or a board member of the U.S. Hemp Roundtable, who also supported the bill and was pushing it very aggressively, we used that seat to push for changes to the Hemp Advancement Act. And I'm happy to tell you that shortly there's going to be a bipartisan bill introduced in the 118th current Congress, which is a revision to the Hemp Advancement Act that takes out the language about synthetics and the change to the definition of hemp that would have been problematic, and essentially just leaves the parts that we like. And we don't like to take all the credit for that, but that only happened because HIA was a partner in the process of developing that legislation. Well, we can't take credit in such strong terms because so many people contributed to the campaign for legalization of hemp. But it is very true that the HIA for years and years was the mecca around which this industry coalesced. Yeah. They met, it was the people who cared enough before there was money to be made in hemp, before there was, when it was still nothing but an uphill climb. They would show up every year, they'd bring their knowledge, they would share, they would advocate for, and if you don't have people in an industry pushing for solutions, and in some cases setting aside their parochial competitive instincts and really sitting side by side at the same table, you end up getting, like I said, bad policy. Yeah. So yeah, the HIA was definitely instrumental. Somewhere in around, I think it was 2003, we split off a sister organization called Vote Hemp, which became sort of our lobbying arm. We shared an executive director for a long time. And really, they were the ones inside the Beltway. But HIA and Vote Hemp up until 2017 were basically just two sides of the same coin. And the Roundtable came around about 2014 as well. They started out as a Kentucky-based organization, moved to DC after 2016. So it's, everybody pulling in the same direction is never going to happen, but if you can get enough leaders, you can drag everybody along with you. And that's the idea behind the HIA. I appreciate that. We are a trade association, so our voting members, the ones that get to vote for our board members, and
you have a vote coming up, correct?
Every year we have an election, and the members elect other members to lead the organization. That's the way it's been going all the way back to 1994, and it's a very sort of small d democratic-based organization. We have members that are small farms, small businesses, some of the larger businesses, but 90% of our members are small farms and small businesses. We do have an individual membership for supporters, for consumers, and with that you get some valuable information about what's going on in your state with hemp developments. You get snapshot and analysis of what's developing at the federal level, get volunteer opportunities and the opportunity to take part in events. So it's what you don't get is the right to vote as an individual, because we're a business group, so the businesses are the voting members. But there's a lot of supporter members who their company hasn't seen the wisdom of joining yet, but they want to know and they want to stay abreast of what's going on, or they were with a company that was a member and they move on to another business, but they liked having a membership, so they join as supporters. So it's been we actually just started up that membership. It's only it's less than $50, and you can become a member at our website. That's thehia.org, thehia.org. Or you could just go to joinhemp.org, which is a lot easier to remember.
So thehia.org or joinhemp.org.
Yep.
Either one goes to you guys.
That's right.
Perfect.
And if you want to learn a little bit more specifically about these issues, check out defendhemp.com.
Defendhemp.com. And then The Emperor Wears No Clothes is available on Amazon. I've bought multiple copies for myself, for friends, for family. It's a wonderful book. I try and give them away every chance I get because Jack Herer was a just mastermind and a brilliant guy, and had the foresight to understand what was happening long before anybody else realized it.
What's really remarkable is he was a Goldwater Republican before he got into hemp. He served in the Army for 3 years. He was a big patriot. He looked down his nose at hippies, and he says all this himself. He thought that, it wasn't until the late 60s when his girlfriend at the time convinced him to finally try the demon weed, the jazz cabbage, that he gave it a shot. And of course, his whole outlook changed. And then he evolved into the really dedicated advocate and campaigner that we all came to know and love.
That's so fascinating, because now at this point, a lot of our customers are cancer patients, are military veterans. And so, I mean, he was even at the forefront of that.
Oh, yeah.
Of supporting veterans with cannabis, and I love it. That's great.
Well, I mean, he was a grassroots person, and he listened to everybody. And what you learn, and I'm sure you gather the same thing from Hometown Hero, is the customer base that consumes these products isn't some cartoon caricature,
Right.
with a piece headband and long straggly hair. It's grandmas who would never in their life want to walk into a dispensary,
Correct.
or it's veterans who can't get the medicine that they need from the VA, or it's consumers who just want to have a good time without fearing the risk of arrest.
Yeah.
So it's not at all the scary thing that a lot of people think it is.
Yeah, it's wild just watching even older movies, and you've got these sort of stoner stereotypes. We're in Austin, so there's all these movies. Dazed and Confused is a perfect example, right? They portray these people that use cannabis products as sort of these kind of dumb and slow stoners, and it's quite the contrary. The people that I know that use cannabis on a daily basis are some of the fastest, most smart people that I've ever met. And it's really interesting to see sort of the difference of the stereotypes that have been portrayed in the media over the years.
Yeah, I think that's true. And really, hemp-derived cannabinoids have mostly flown under the radar.
Yeah.
I mean, the market grew and expanded in states where there was hardly any legal marijuana because of the high amount of demand.
Texas is the perfect example.
Texas is a great example. But what it does is it gives a lie to, in Arkansas right now, they're making a tragic mistake.
Yeah.
They are passing legislation that is essentially doing the exact same thing that Harry Anslinger did in 1937. They're saying untrue things. In the state house, they called Delta 8, what was it, a synthetic psychotropic, or no, a synthetic opioid is what they called it during testimony to ban these products. And that was 1937 you had that happening. And it's unbelievable to me that we've made it almost a century and we have states recommitting those same errors. And it's a tragic opportunity for states like Arkansas.
I think they see it that it worked 100 years ago. Why not try it again?
You can always get elected by demagoguing and making people scared and getting them to turn out. And so we have to fight that with reason and logic and science.
Yeah. Well, I love what you guys do. I'm a huge supporter, and just thank you from the bottom of my heart. I firmly believe this industry, without a doubt, probably wouldn't exist without what you guys have done, and I know you're very humble about it, but I personally believe that the work you've put in allows this industry to be here and thrive, and so I wanted to thank you for everything that you've done. It's pretty incredible.
Well, thanks very much. Appreciate that. I'm paid by the HIA. I'm an employee. The real heroes, the people who've gotten stuff done, are the volunteer leaders over the years. Like I said, those people who kept showing up, kept pushing when there was no profit motive to be had. That stood up for hemp and what was right, and for people's freedom to make their own choices. So even today, and the group really has evolved tremendously from those days back when it was guys like Chris Conrad and David Bronner and Jack Herrera and others. But today we have companies like Hometown Hero on the board, and CBD Kratom, and we have major grain producers from Canada, and we have the board president is a Kentucky regenerative farmer, and he just has a small property, a couple of acres. For him, hemp is just another crop he adds to the rotation because it's a good cover crop. He doesn't romanticize it, So you have all walks of life coming together, meeting for this mission-based organization. And one of the reason that I took the job is because it's not just a trade association. One of the things our members decide is our mission. They decide what the mission is and our nonprofit purposes. So when we reconstituted, they came up with a new mission, and that mission is not just to make advance hemp or the hemp economy and educate people. It's to educate the market for the benefit of our members, but also the public and the planet. To do good with hemp is what the purpose of the HIA is.
I love it.
And to me, that's what sets this industry apart from widget makers, right? There's a strong contingent in this industry of people who want to make the world a better place, for whom business is just part of what they're here for. So that's what's inspiring.
I want to ask you a little bit of a contentious question, and then we'll wrap up. In your opinion, why does the marijuana industry seem to hate the hemp industry so much and seem to kind of want to get rid of us? And this is an interesting one because as we evolve, it seems like it's getting more contentious, and there's business reasons behind it. But I'm curious from your perspective, how you guys interact with the marijuana industry.
Well, from my perspective, it's actually pretty interesting because prior to my time at HIA, I joined in 2020. I spent a few years doing the fundraising for the Marijuana Policy Project.
Interesting.
which is an organization responsible for most of the legalization ballot initiatives that have passed, including Colorado and elsewhere. While I was there, we managed to get Illinois, Michigan, and Maine passed. So hemp was an afterthought. I mean, there were copies of Jack's book on the shelf, but nobody cracked it open. Nobody was thinking about cannabis plant as an agricultural commodity. Hemp was just sort of a side product. Since then, what's happened is hemp got legalized, and there's been an explosion of competing products on the market, getting into those states where marijuana doesn't have a market itself. And that's what's causing a lot of that strife. But it's not just that, it's also within the hemp industry. You know, a lot of the heat, a lot of the conflict is generated because in the run-up to legalization, the HIA, the Roundtable, Vote Hemp, all these groups were beating the drum that hemp couldn't get you high. We were telling lawmakers that. We were saying, you know, the slogan was rope, not dope. And we put it on hemp-based t-shirts, right? And we were trying to get lawmakers to pass it. And then, you know, legalization happens, and within a few years, they figure out how to create products that do have an effect like that.
We had the same thing happen in Texas.
And yeah, so there is a conflict in the hemp industry itself. I mean, and the HIA is a great microcosm of that because we're such a big ticket and because we're involved in all aspects of hemp. We have members for whom, you know, that rope not dope thing was, you know, basically, I'm surprised they didn't get it tattooed on their chest. I mean, it was what they lived by. And we have others who have just gotten into the hemp industry with the new products, and trying to reconcile that is a bit of a challenge. But it's the reality is you can't choose what products make it to market first, and the market is a sort of force of nature. So what we want to make sure we can do is figure out a way to do good with the opportunities that hemp presents, and it's always going to create new opportunities because there's so much you can do with it.
Yeah, we've run into a couple issues in Texas where some of the politicians feel like they were, you know, lied to about the hemp-derived cannabinoids, and especially the ones that are psychoactive. But the reality is, when a lot of this stuff was done, there wasn't really a market for it. A lot of those products weren't fully understood or fully vetted out. They really didn't exist.
Nobody knew. I mean, nobody was lied to. There was like one published research study on the effects of delta-8 THC from the marijuana plant. And that was, you know, I think from like the early 90s or something. That was the only piece of published literature. You know, one major impact of prohibition is that nobody knew much about this plant because research hadn't been conducted in the modern era. So, you know, it was probably a bit, it was a bit of hubris to think that we could know for sure exactly what could come from this plant once the floodgates were open and people could figure out how to make products. But there was certainly no duplicity involved. I mean, prior to the rise of CBD, industrial hemp was what was being talked about exclusively, and that was for, you know, textiles and natural products. And CBD helped legalization get across the finish line, but it was sort of a side, you know, small thing that cropped up right before legalization happened. But now, you know, the flower and the extracts that come from it and all those products, that's 90% of the industry, at least, you know, from a value standpoint.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about hemp is, you know, in my years of doing this now and talking to all these different people and consumers, sort of the average Joe, for the most part, doesn't understand that hemp and marijuana come from the same plant. It's the same plant.
Well, either that or they don't understand where the federal government is making the distinction, right? Which makes sense because it's very arbitrary. 0.3% delta-9 THC. The guy who came up with that 0.3% himself said, "Hey, that was just a placeholder. That's not scientific. Why are you using that?" So,
interesting. I didn't know that.
There's no scientific basis for that whatsoever. So yeah, I mean, it was always sort of arbitrary, and the dividing line between hemp and marijuana is a fiction created by the federal government.
Correct. It's a regulatory term. It doesn't exist in nature.
And, you know, because marijuana, the word, was chosen with racial implications back in the 30s, a lot of people don't want to use it, but it's important to make this distinction that cannabis is not illegal. Cannabis is not illegal at all. Marijuana, according to the federal government, is illegal, and they call marijuana varieties of the cannabis plant that have over 0.3% delta-9 THC. So that, you know, that hemp dividing line means that cannabis legalization has started at the federal level, and you know, hopefully we'll see more sanity along those lines before long.
Yeah, I love it. Jody, again, thank you for everything you've done. Give another plug for your websites, the two websites where they can reach you guys.
Joinhemp.org. Please check it out. You can get in touch with me directly if you have any questions.
Jody McGinness from the HIA, Hemp Industry Association, a very good friend, industry leader, and somebody I very much look up to, and am very grateful for your existence and everything that you've done for this industry. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it.
Happy hunting, everybody. Thank you for joining us this week, and we will be back next week. Thank you.